Hello, my name is Katie James. I am a Latin and music teacher at Vanguard College Preparatory School in Waco. Like many of you, when the pandemic hit, I felt myself completely unprepared. I had to learn quickly to adapt to the constant use of technology as a teaching and assessment tool. Like many others, I stressed about the AP exams. I stressed about how I was going to motivate my students to do anything. I stressed about how I was going to turn a perfectly fine in-person educational experience into an enriching virtual one. I must admit that I am one of the least technologically savvy people of my generation. I have always avoided technology whenever possible. I'd rather find another way. Yet for most of us, spring 2020 proved that there was no other way. For the next few minutes, I would like to share with you some of the more successful virtual activities I discovered and some best practices moving forward in this ever-changing world. I can't help but be reminded of the end of the Roman Republic, the end of an age of brick, rostra, and orators, which quickly changed into the beginning of the Roman Empire, an age of marble, tourism, and palaces. When I returned to in-service in person this August, I was told that not only was I to teach like I normally would, but now I had to record every lecture, use Google Classroom on a daily basis, and provide an environment where students could switch to virtual learning anytime. I'm sure that many of you were also confronted with this monumental task. Initially, I felt like Sisyphus being told I was to push a boulder up a technological mountain, knowing that I would fail over and over again. I have seen the rock fall a few times now, and like you, I am trying to figure out a way to be successful at it. A pulley system, maybe? Gone are the days, or so it seems, of quizzes on paper, nice little handwritten translations, where I could write little corrections on them and hand them back to the students. It used to be so much fun to sight read with the kids, or better yet, to launch the class into a philosophical discussion regarding Horace's notion that nihil est ab omni parte beatum. Now, how am I going to get that translation to stick? Or explain that passive periphrastic in context when all the students see is a screen? I used to say, look at the Latin, and now what? Look at the screen? Well, that sounds hypocritical. I mean, how do you have a real debate over Zoom? How do you have Latin Club? Today, I will focus on 3 aspects of teaching that 2020 has proven to change the most. So let me share my screen with you. Here we go. Okay. So back then, all this fun stuff we used to do, and now what? We have to do Zoom, we have to do all these fancy things that we didn't know how to do. Here's my 3 aspects of teaching. The first key is daily classroom life. Then I'll talk about translations and then maybe how you can incorporate some fun projects in a semi-virtual or virtual setting. The first key change I've observed in my experience with virtual school is how has it affected my daily classroom life. While we are currently operating on an in-person basis, we are also operating under the assumption that anyone could be absent at any time. So I've come up with assignments that reflect sort of a new classroom culture. In addition, I will also give some ideas about creating effective classroom translation assignments, and if you're feeling really creative, project assignments. First, I'm sure most of you are familiar, with Google Classroom or a similar online portal. I want to take you to mine so that you can see some fun things that we have set up and how I use it. There are lots of people out there that are more savvy than I am who can even put interactive classrooms and widgets on their home pages. Unfortunately, I'm still barely surviving, and I can't be all fancy yet. But levity, I have discovered, is key. I put up like a Latin joke of the week. I go find it and I post it. Just some fun, where'd it go? Some fun, memes and, comics and things like that. So if you were to click on any of these, I'd have some kind of silly image that would pop up here. Let's see if it does. No. Okay. Well, anyway, you just find like a comic strip or something like that. things like handouts. This is the more important thing anyway, but if you look, I have one on, let's see, sometimes it's a little slow to operate. So I have classroom videos here, and for example, I have, I don't know, let's see, so I have this ablatives, and I have a Google Slides that a student made. I have a handout. I have a video that I created, and then another handout. So I've been teaching for about 10 years, and so some of these handouts I already had. I have assigned in the past some sort of like Abla's presentation. So I just took, and so this was something somebody turned in. I just took them and I put them all here. And then as I taught it in class, I also recorded a video of it. Sometimes I audio record depending on what I'm teaching. And then I post them all in these sort of concept folders where students can go and review and refresh things. Another really fun thing that I have discovered has been really good for translation. Let me show you. I think it's this one. No, it is my other class. Let me go to my other class. So I have been translating Pyramus and Thisbe with this class just for fun, and we will do class translations. You've got this, you know, I have the assignments here, which I'll show you in a minute, but I also have this allowed audio file. So what I do, and I can play a sample for you from my phone actually, but this is a sample of how I translate with the kids in class. This is Pyramus and Thisbe, starting at line 133. It's the part where Thisbe finds out what Pyramus did and has second thoughts about her choice in a boyfriend. Dum dubitat tremebunda videt pulsare cruenta membra solumbre troque pedem tulit oraque buxo pallidiore gerens ex vorvit aequoris instar quod tremit exigua cum sumum stringitur aura. This translates to, while she is doubting, or while she's sitting there wondering about the tree and the color of its fruit, she sees the trembling branches strike the blood-soaked ground. In other words, the fruit is so heavy that it's falling down onto the ground. She takes a step backwards and, bearing a face lighter or whiter than boxwood, which is a very white wood, she's pale in other words, she shuddered in the same way as the sea. So that's just a sample, but basically I go through it line by line, just like you would in a classroom setting. But by having it recorded, that actually allows the students to go back through it several times. So that is really, really helpful. So that's kind of how my Google Classroom works. And I have several different assignments on here as well. I'm just thinking if there's anything else I could show you. I think I'll show you the other things here in a second. Quizlet, as you probably all know, super, super helpful. So my brother Ben actually taught me this. He has been a Latin teacher as well, and he started making these formulas for grammar, and then he also would make like all of the different vocabulary lists, and then I realized how helpful this was, and so I started doing it myself. And I discovered when you go to virtual, like let's say we canceled school next week because we had too many kids who were sick, and we went to virtual, all of these lists are there. They also read them aloud to the kids. They do all kinds of testing, so you can study in a variety of ways, flashcards. You can test yourself. You can play games with them. There's actually Quizlet Live. They can play together. So if there's a Zoom meeting or something like that where you're meeting virtually, you can do this. Obviously, you can do Kahoot and things like that too, but Quizlet has so many things. The teacher, it's pretty inexpensive to get a teacher membership, but the teacher membership has more benefits to it. But if you see my list here, you can just kind of see how you can use Quizlet to your benefit. You know, and to the kids as well. So it's been really, really helpful to see that. in them and their success with vocabulary, whether or not we're in person, if they're absent or if they're present, they always have a place to go for the vocabulary list. There's ways that you can have them turn in study sets so they can study a certain number of times. You can set that up in Quizlet and then they submit it and you can see what their scores were on the you test yourself feature or anything like that. So you can even run quizzes and test through Quizlet, especially in a virtual setting. When I'm in person, I don't tend to use grades from Quizlet, but I definitely have them use Quizlet to study so they get that process down. One of my favorite things I did while we were in virtual school was sight reading assignments. They are a bear to make, but they're really effective in a virtual setting. This is one of my favorite ones that I created. So I go to like the Latin library and I copy paste the text and then I put the line numbers in here and then I create some multiple choice and different kinds of questions, very AP style, AP prep. Sometimes you can go to the NLE website and get some inspiration from that, but basically you create these questions and in Google Forms, which is where I created this, there's a way to create something as a quiz. So then you can go in and you can, once the whole thing is formatted the way you want, you can actually go in and answer all the questions correctly, and then this will auto grade for you. So the work on the front end of this is really, really tricky, but once it's in there, you can use it. So now I plan to use this every year for the foreseeable future as a sight reading passage and kind of knock it out that way. Then we can, of course, if we're in person, we'll go back through it, we can translate it and all kinds of things, but at least this gives them a kind of an initial start with the text. Even if they're at home, they can look at this. You can have a whole library of these, depending on how much time you've got. You can make them fancy, not fancy, whatever, but they're real user-friendly. Google Forms is super easy to use. Okay, I'm going to go on now to the next section, which is translations. I love the concept of the modus, thanks to Donna Gerard in my AP training from several years ago. I learned the best ways to have students prepare translations. Specifically, I learned that there isn't enough, it's not enough to have them leave room for phrases or just parse a verb. It's critical that they look at every word, as you know, and organize their thoughts, organize the language. But how on earth can we really do this in a pandemic, especially if we're not sure if we're going to be back tomorrow, we're not sure if we're going to see them in person? How can I check and see if this is right? So first, I'll show you what my translation assignments look like and the benefits I've seen students receive from them. A big deal for me to involve every student is to give each student a different translation assignment from a larger passage. Donna has called this chunking when she's done her AP trainings, although I've heard a variety of terms. It is a very effective practice when students are apart from one another because even though a test covers all the material, students are going to rely upon each other more for correct translation. With this process, students are less likely to visit a random site on the internet or Google Translate. I've noticed because there's too much in the process. There's too many things they have to do. The Google Translate won't help them. And then we go over them in class. And I ask the students to use a second color when we go over them. So let me show you the sample, and then I'll kind of show you another sample that's completed so you can see the idea. But I've created this based off of that original idea that I said that Donna had done. She had them do it on notebook paper when I was doing the training. That's kind of what we kind of looked at and experimented with. This one I've created after a few years of teaching for levels 1 through 2. So I have them write out their assigned text. It can be poetry, it can be prose, whatever. Every word they don't know, even if it's glossed for them, I ask them to write in this box. That way there's a place to go for vocabulary. They're creating their own folia, essentially, in this box. And then, depending on their level, these instructions change, but I have them parse the main verb, or all the verbs or participles if they're at that level. This is a very basic level 1 type of document. Nouns, identifying case number and gender, back in level 1, when you're learning all these things, it's really important to kind of be able to sort out the difference, obviously, between how to parse verbs and how to parse nouns. This is a great way to do it. Might as well do it while you're translating. It's going to benefit everybody else too. And then prepositional phrases, grammatical clauses, they're supposed to write them out here. And then an attempt at a translation. And I always say attempt because students are never going to get it right. And if they do get it right, it's likely that they use the internet to get the answer. So I always like to say an attempt, and then I have them corrected in another color. And without a second color, students actually lose points on the assignment. The new color correction time takes us through that translation again. So if we are in class and then we go over their translation, we go over it in detail, we talk through it, all the other students are listening. If they're intelligent, they're taking notes, and then now we've gone back through that text. So for this student on this chunk, this is the second time now they're going through the text. Here's an advanced level sample. Oh, and as we go, I audio record the Latin and English on my phone, kind of like I played for you before, and then I post that to Google Classroom. So it kind of all comes around to that. And you can organize it all kinds of ways on Google Classroom to make it easy for them to find. But here's an example of an advanced poetry assignment that I gave to a student. So this translation assignment is, as you can see, a little more complex. It's actually, some of them are more than one page. I actually give them a second page for when I give them a longer translation or for a corrected version of the translation. I just did a one-page one for you here, but I have them write out the chunk. I even have a spot where they can write which line numbers they're doing on some of my assignment pages. And then you can look up and define all the words, like I said. But look, this student realized that as we went, that nuays can mean snowy, but it can also mean beautiful in certain contexts. So she wrote in green here how that's different, and that's why I used this sample. She did a really good job of making corrections here. She also went through and we parsed things together. I explained how some things are historic present, some things are all that stuff. They put in these boxes here. And then chunking things out, dividing things into phrases. And then the attempt. And then, of course, you see the second color here. So you can see where her correction is. Now, the question is, how do we get this information, which she's going to, submit via Google Classroom or whatever site you guys use, and how do we get that to the other students? Because that's really a big deal for them to have what they need. So here's what I do next. And I have presented on this in the past. Step 2, basically, of the translation assignments. I presented on this a few years back, but it has many flaws if it's used just by itself. You really need that modus type translation. In essence, it allows students to sort of a round 2 or even round 3 for serious translating. Sure, they're going to go look at their paper, they're going to type out a translation. They can be robotic about it, but there's a lot of things they're required to do as far as editing and things like that, and it's going to involve them into the text one more time. So for example, and this one I didn't include any of the comments because I made a copy of this doc, but basically they're in charge of typing out their text. They're in charge of changing it to their assigned color or whatever y'all want to do, however you want to, have them make it uniquely theirs. I do it in colors because I have small classes, and there's enough colors in Google Drive to have everybody have a different one. And then they put their English underneath right here. And then they are supposed to, and again, this is a copied text, but they put a comment in with the parsing, with any grammatical structures, with everything that we went over on that original document. That goes in here too. Now all of their classmates can view this document, access it, and see all the notes that they had in the modus. The modus was for them, this is for their classmates. If something is missing, it's a big deal because now the test is supposed to cover all this material and yet it's not there. There's the studying for the test itself. Students have now at their studying leisure both an audio recording, which I did in class, and a visual aid, this doc. The best part is if listening along to essentially what is now an audio book of the translation, they will gravitate toward that Latin text again. So they will look at the Latin, whether it's in the doc or in their books, and I don't usually even need to remind them to do it. I'm seeing them do this naturally on their own. Then I'm going to go to, so that's kind of how I've been using translation. It's been working pretty well in the virtual, semi-virtual setting. I'll go on now to project assignments. There are all kinds of things you can do with projects, and there's a lot of people out there who are way more creative than I am. But here's my big question. This is the one that I had when we switched to virtual. How is a student supposed to get up and present in front of the class when they're all supposed to face the same direction in person, or they're on Zoom? I mean, it's just not the same having that presenter, because students, on Zoom, they can just, check out, turn off their screen, whatever. So if they can't, and in person, if they can't pass around their artwork because it's a touch point, and they can't, do some of the things that or make food or whatever it was they were doing before, maybe there's something else they can do, something that requires them also to learn how to use technology in a more advanced way. After all, technology for them will be the foreseeable future. And if we are educating the whole person, we need to show them how effective it can be as a tool. Last year, my classes were planning an in-person presentation on gladiatorial games, and then they were going to stage a match. And this, of course, was rendered moot in the spring and it was still impossible this fall. In honor of their enthusiasm, we decided together to tweak the presentation style. So before I show you portions of it, I would like to make the disclaimer that before spring of 2020, I had absolutely no clue, no interest, and no intention of ever creating or editing a video. None. In fact, I have always wholeheartedly turned such opportunities down. But remember, I introduced myself as a music teacher. Last spring, I had no choice but to create and edit a video so that my orchestra would get a chance to have a performance. Taking what I learned from that painstakingly slow experience, I was able to gather researched video presentations from my students this fall, cut them down, and create one big video that contains both researched information and some fun theatrical stuff too. Now the students are not just presenting to the class or seeking to please me. Now they're performing and presenting to the broader audience at school, to the broader audience on the internet. Now the video becomes a key recruitment tool. It will be posted on the internet, likely found time and again by students searching for more information about Roman circenses or looking for ideas themselves. I will play part of it now at the conclusion of my presentation, but I will also encourage you to explore movie and sound editing platforms such as WeVideo, iMovie, or the like. They could do pre-recorded submissions. You can create an assignment in Google Classroom or in whatever platform you're in, and there's a lot of clouds out there. You just have them upload their video to that cloud, whatever it is, Google Classroom or, Dropbox or whatever you use. And then you give them time restrictions so that you have the ability to, put all of the movies together. You can make it really simple and require them to do a backing music track. I mean, if you want it to be really interesting, there's a lot of things you can put on the students here. It needs to be, you could have research-based and entertaining. You could have any topic from Roman history, mythology, any of it, and use this format and have them submit digitally. And now you have more material you can use. You also have material you can later present to other students as samples of work from students before. You can use them on days when you're absent from school, when there's a sub and you need them to learn something. You can play these videos for them. There's a lot of things you can do by kind of collecting these kinds and creating these kinds of videos. If you have no time to make a video, I totally understand that, and you could find a very enthusiastic and tech-savvy student at your school, or a TA, or whatever, students from another class to do the video editing portion for you. And you could even, with your own students who are pretty tech-savvy now, you could turn that into its own grade. Like, here's a grade for the project, and then you're going to get this other grade over here for making it a video. This is all useful to them. I hope that I've gone quickly because I don't want to, waste your time, but I hope that these tips and tools have been somewhat helpful for you. I hope you can also look to the ephemeral and ever elusive future with hope. There is a boldness and resilience now in these students that I have not seen in previous years. They see technology more as a tool and less as simply leisure. The otium their phones have provided in the past has transformed into a negotium in school. They now value in-person interaction, and they use their phones less for fluffy stuff. To quote Bastille's Pompeii, "The walls are tumbling down in the city that we love. Great clouds roll over the hills, bringing darkness from above. But if you close your eyes, does it almost feel like nothing changed at all? Oh, where do we begin?" Let's take what it feels like the rubble of our former teaching selves and coat it with the marble of our future. Let's just begin and see what happens. Before I play this video, I would like to show you that I do have the sources for my images that I use in the background. Here's an email address that you can use if you have questions or want specific instructions to use any of these platforms. I'm happy to find them or make them for you. I also want to give special thanks to William Priest, my department head, my brother Ben Smith, who was the source of our Quizlets, and of course Nicole Lehman, along with all of TCA, for allowing me to present today. I hope you enjoy the video. I'll skip around so you're not stuck watching it the whole time, but I want to give you some fun entertainment for you as we conclude this lecture. Thank you.
The Colosseum is one of the most widely known buildings in the city that is still partly standing today. It was the site of fights between gladiators, reenactments of naval battles, fights between animals, and other typically violent spectacles. An army of archers might meet a pack of panthers, or a gladiator might be forced to fight for his life against a lion.
5 different types of seats. In the lower, the seats were and closer to the fields, the higher social status they showed. And here's the visual example of the audience in Colosseum. Here we can see people cooking, here we can see people fighting. And this is my visual representation about how Colosseum looked like in old days. And here we can see a gladiator grouped off by a lion. And then here's a gladiator about to fight against lion, and audience betting money on who's gonna win. Here we can see people yelling.
Gladiators became rich and famous. Carvings.
Combat quickly became a very important part of the Panem and Circensian Roman Empire at its height in 117 AD.
Gladiators also performed mock battles between different Roman enemies, such as the Samnites and the Thracians. The Samnites were heavily armored on their legs, arms, and head. The Thracians only got small curved swords and shields. Gladiators who were too injured to fight were finished off by people dressed as the Charon, who was an Etruscan by the die.
Gladiators could be sent to gladiator school, and there are 4 major ones.
Gladius, meaning sword in Latin. They were trained professional fighters who were mostly slaves and prisoners of war. They would fight in the Colosseum, and usually the spectators and the emperor, they would decide whether they would live or die.
Well, if one gladiator loses to the other but is not necessarily killed, he can put up his arm in a plea for mercy, and the crowd can decide whether he lives or dies.
I'm Julius Caesar.
Their name means net man in Latin. They usually had a trident, a long trident, and a net. On the other.
Like these little beads here.
Firstly,
This is a
So, for example, the cataphractius, they rarely fought against each other, and they usually used very exotic weaponry. The cataphractius in particular was required to dress like what Romans thought barbarians looked like.
They were armed with a strip
against the bestiarii, who were war criminals, and these criminals were sentenced to a brutal death fighting a starved animal, often a lion, to the death, which would obviously be near impossible.
You heading over to the games today? I heard they got some new POWs from Thrace and Gaul. Nala, but I will if you will make a bet with me. No food for you. Take this.
The Circus Maximus was initially built to be in the shape of a bullet. A juvenile wrote about the horse's racing career could last up to
And that's it, folks. Thanks for watching. I hope that was helpful. Feel free to email me if you want any specifics about anything or any links. Thanks. Bye.